Welcome to Kinotherapy, everyone. I'm Gordon Morgans, and I'm very excited about today's director. I know I said that in my last video on Ingmar Bergman, but nevertheless it's true. I may be even more excited about this video's auteur, as he is perhaps my favorite artist of all time. I admit doing a video on Ingmar Bergman may have been jumping ahead a little too far, given his slow pace and complex themes. But for this video, I want to take us out of existential Sweden and return us to the much more accessible world of the excitable and booming film industry of early Hollywood. A man who instills joy and hope and is perhaps the most important and recognizable icon in all of cinema. I can hardly contain my excitement for him calmly. He is the one, the only, Charlie Chaplin. Even if you haven't seen a single film from Chaplin, he's immediately recognizable, given his signature character and dress. The pale white face with the tiny mustache, the thin waistcoat, his bow legs protruding large shoes at the bottom. During his heyday, Chaplin was the biggest film star in the world and attracted people all over the globe to theaters for him to entertain. He was a refreshing comfort for those caught in the Great Depression, giving them someone to relate to and laugh at. Known for his slapstick and physical comedy, which in its basic form wasn't anything new to silent films. However, Chaplin's comedy was sophisticated, drawing on situations and character-based gags. Chaplin's character, the Little Tramp, was a poor, homeless wanderer with a good heart but a little rough around the edges. He could save a damsel in distress, but wasn't above kicking someone in the rear. One thing that made Chaplin so famous was not just his comedy, but his performances. He was perhaps the best actor of the silent comedy genre, and still to this day one of the most talented comedic actors to grace the screen. Raised in showbiz practically his whole life, Chaplin combined miming techniques to his performance, creating expressions that were grand, but discernible and funny. Chaplin had an effortless gift to make anything amusing. Just seeing this peculiar little man caught in awkward situations or fight with inanimate objects is so enjoyable to watch, and I love how he interacts with things. I think Charlie Chaplin is hilarious, but the reason he's my favorite is not just because of his comedy. I adore Chaplin because he was more than that. In addition to comedy, he gradually began introducing drama, pathos, heart, social, and political commentary into his films. As his career progressed, he wanted to branch out and grow as an artist, to express himself. His films were sweet, sad, and brilliant, with just the right amount of each ingredient. Chaplin's films were never depressing, and always hopeful. They were first and foremost entertaining. Chaplin knew how important that was, to cast emotions appropriately, to be funny, but when he had tear-jerking scenes, he stuck with it. When you feel your eyes watering, Chaplin will run with the scene, as if he magically knows just how affected you are by it. He trusts the audience's indulgence and wants them to feel sympathetic and tearful at these moments. He never interrupts these moments with forced laughs, grinding it to a screeching halt, like some directors would. It's been noted that Chaplin was never too innovative with his camera work, which is true to some extent. Yet make no mistake, his films are meant for the visual medium of cinema. You can tell what he's thinking, not by reading the title cards, but by reading his body language. With as little dialogue as possible, Chaplin told some of the most hilarious and heart-touching stories ever shown on screen. He could convey ideas and take you on a ride of emotions, and he did that all through the simplistic stories of a sole, lowly, outcasted man. Chaplin was first and foremost a visual artist, and is exactly why I love film. If I ever met somebody who had never seen a movie before, and I had to show them something that would introduce them to what cinema is all about, I would show them a Charlie Chaplin film. And that's why I'm discussing Charlie Chaplin now. He's such a key figure in the evolution of cinema, and is a perfect starting place for any newcomers to old or silent films. Oops, I mean classic movies, not old movies. That's what they are. Charlie Chaplin was born in London, England on April 16, 1889. Chaplin lived his whole childhood in poverty and hardship. His father was normally absent, and his mother struggled with illnesses coming and going. Charlie and his brother Sidney had to stay at orphanages and workhouses while their mother was in the hospital. Because it was so embedded in his life, Chaplin constantly dealt with poverty in his films due to his upbringing. By their teens, however, the Chaplin brothers would spend most of their time at the theater. Chaplin was brought up in show business. Both his parents were performers, and he even jumped on stage at age 5. He had a strong excitement for it, and performing ran in his blood. He had a gift for comedy and acting that was soon revered by many. Him and Sidney joined Fred Karno's comedy troupe and toured North America a couple times. On the second trip, Charlie was noticed by Max Sennett, head of Keystone Studios. Keystone was perhaps the most important studio for silent comedies, and featured Fatty Arbuckle, Mabel Normand, and the Keystone Cops. Chaplin starred in some shorts for Keystone, and soon moved up to directing. Chaplin, however, didn't necessarily like the Keystone pictures, and would quarrel over creative decisions. He moved on to other studios, which he expressed was much happier making films. It was at Keystone, however, when Chaplin first developed his universally admired character, the Little Tramp. Audiences first laid eyes on the Tramp in Chaplin's second starring film, Kid Auto Races at Venice. While putting the costume together, Chaplin wanted everything to be a contradiction. The pants baggy, the waistcoat thin, the hat small, the shoes large. It was common for comedians at the time to wear large mustaches on screen. Chaplin didn't like them as he thought it would hinder his facial expressions, therefore settled on a small toothbrush mustache, or Chaplin stash. Stop calling it a Hitler stash. Chaplin did it first. The look of him alone is funny and evokes a classical commedia persona. I get shivers down my spine thinking of Chaplin putting this costume together and looking in the mirror, facing his new creation. I wonder if he knew that this face would be an immortal symbol of joy and inspiration for generations to come. The Tramp is intended to be a sad clown, or Pierrot character, a joyful human being, but not without his heartbreak and tragedies. The Tramp is everything Chaplin's films are, and is one of the most famous characters in cinema history for a reason. Now, before we get into his feature-length films, I want to try something a little different with this video. I wanted to briefly cover his short films, but I didn't want them to be too detailed like the later reviews in the video. Chaplin made over 70 short films, and the video would be way too long, obviously. So what I'm going to do is a speed round thing. I'm going to go through some of his short films and give a quick blurb about it. My favorite ones, the essential ones, maybe the ones that aren't so essential, just so you have a good idea of what you're in for and why. I think if you want to appropriately explore Chaplin, you have to watch some of these shorts. But he made so many, so I'm trying this out and seeing how it works. And if it works out well, then I'll probably do it with other directors. Also, to make things easier, these are only shorts that Chaplin directed, not starred in. So, let's begin. In this short, some workers try to blow up a bakery with dynamite, which is something Chaplin used in some of his other films. I don't know if this was a thing in the 1920s, but the short is fun. An interesting change of setting for Chaplin, but not so much pace. It doesn't really make much use of any caveman jokes, and it's not very different from the usual chase and slapstick. The short that highlights just how much of a misfit and unmanly the Tramp is. Needing money and a string of events, he becomes a boxer, which obviously causes some unfortunate mishaps. Again, the charm of these films is Chaplin himself and his incredible performance. There's a lot of slapstick, but it's all based around this odd yet delectable man and his brilliant responses to things. I like the scene where he runs. I know that's vague, but trust me, it's funny. One of my least favorite Chaplin shorts, easily. He's dressed in drag, he runs around, beating people. Even the Wikipedia description is, there is a great amount of punching and kicking. Like, what are you supposed to get from that? One of the few things I dislike from Chaplin. Often considered the official turning point for Chaplin's films, packs a rather sad ending for a comedy. There's some great gags in this, a romance, he stops a robbery, but still becomes heartbroken at the end. So, a really important piece in Chaplin's filmography, really solidifying his character. His whole legacy stems from this closing shot. The opening scene to this short is laugh-out-loud hysterical to me, as Charlie just takes all this abuse from his boss. Some pretty good gags after that. He just walks. It opens with him walking, and it's so much fun to watch. His distinguishable waddle, the way he moves around things, it's so simple, but so silly at the same time. He's not walking, he's working. Only a genius can look at the script and see he walks and has to make that entertaining. A very funny short, but don't get too comfortable. Beware the gut punch, I'm just putting that out there. Very fun adventure with deceit and greed and Chaplin there to save the day. There's a bit with a crane on the boat, which I think might be one of the funniest skits I've ever seen from Chaplin. Chaplin shows just how important character comedy is to him by playing two roles. He writes these scenarios and knows just how each one is supposed to react. The joke isn't something that happened to them, the joke is how the event affects the character. The contrasting, semi-complex joke is that one of them is a drunk, harmless man, while the other is sober and stuffy. A few different versions of the short exist, but don't be fooled, the shorter one is actually the one to watch, as Chaplin wanted to cut out all the obsolete excess. This is a very funny short and is a parody of the classic tale Carmen, so that's enough to get me hooked. Chaplin is torn between good and bad in this short. He's inspired to do good, but is then coerced into robbing a house. Does Chaplin give in to temptation, or will he be redeemed? It's Charlie Chaplin as a firefighter! Who would want to see that? Even if he's not a great firefighter. Seriously, they ignore the alarm at one point. Chaplin uses situations and peculiar actions to make the comedy here. It's a broad idea with hilarious moments constructed by a hilarious performer. It's standard Chaplin in the best way. A great chapter in the Tramp saga. Chaplin balances comedy, drama, romance, adventure. He even shows off his musical skills. A significant development in the arc of the Tramp, who loves, fights, and learns. One of the few times Chaplin played a rich man, drunk, who comes home early in the morning. The short features only him the entire time and consists of him just trying to go to bed. It's like Chaplin doing a Seinfeld idea. The whole time he's just trying to get upstairs, trying to get ready for bed, but this drunk idiot is so wasted that he can't. He once again takes a minimal concept where the comedic genius stems from just his body. It's brilliant simplicity. There's some bits with a ladder that are uncontrollably hilarious in this. Chaplin is like a child the way he plays with things. Takes place in a film studio. There's some great gags with heavy objects and lifting, and a cute kiss. One of the cutest kisses in Chaplin's films. There's a great gag here where Chaplin eats a guy's sandwich at the same time he eats it, which is pretty funny. Oh, and more frustrated workers try to blow the place up with dynamite. Why? Chaplin shows off just how amazing he is at, well, everything. But skating particularly in this short. He skates around, does all sorts of tricks, and whatever jokes you can think of him involving skates, Chaplin does that and more. One of my all-time favorite Chaplin shorts, easily. Chaplin, inspired to do good, becomes a policeman. He stops a bad guy, all seems light and funny. Then, suddenly, he sees a poor woman stealing bread. Suddenly he's thrust into this moral dilemma. Chaplin is just... he's just so human and so brilliant. I love this short so much. Chaplin makes light of poverty, social classes, even drug abuse. And he explores good, evil, opportunity, and social classes. Chaplin once again plays a drunk rich man, satirizing the wasteful lives the upper class live. Yet Chaplin still feels out of place, like getting a massage from the large Henry Bergman, or an awkward swimsuit scene. Has one of the funniest endings to a Chaplin short, in my opinion. Chaplin goes even further with his social commentary while making a short about immigrants coming to America. We can laugh at Chaplin during this time, but also sympathize with him and everyone aboard this boat. There's even a couple jabs at the supposed American dream and the poor treatment of immigrants. This didn't sit well with some patriots, and this is only the beginning of this issue. Trust me, I'll get to that later. The second half, however, doesn't have much to do with the initial subject matter. It's still funny, and there's a great scene that really showcases the power of silent cinema. A scene in which a character tells another character that someone has died. No dialogue, not even title cards. The audience is thinking that, and the film knows it, and conveys it with fantastic performances. One of Chaplin's most legendary shorts. Chaplin is an escaped convict being hunted by the law. There's some enticing and funny chase sequences that happen at the beginning and end of the film. Chaplin rescues a girl and her family from drowning, but will she be able to accept him? One of Chaplin's most memorable films, because there's a dog, and the dog is cute! But besides that, the dog actually serves a purpose to the plot, and plays a key role in many of the gags. Chaplin took broad ideas like this and said, what can I do with this? How can I make this funny? What parts of humanity can I portray with this? A Dog's Life is delightful, I love it. This is a propaganda film. I do not like propaganda films. Their core incentive is not for art, it is to brainwash people. However, this is still a Chaplin film, and comes off more as an advertisement for something that's more or less harmless. Chaplin is always fun to watch, and the visual style of this is very unique and something Chaplin never did in any of his other films. Enjoyable, but at the end of the day, it's still a commercial, and you can get the same experience from things that aren't trying to sell you stuff. One of Chaplin's most famous shorts. I love the opening with him writing his name, and of course him in basic training has got some great opportunities. The drill sergeant tries to get him to walk normally, that's great. There's a part where he's disguised as a tree, that's hilarious. There's a scene where Chaplin's bunk gets flooded, and this is something that actually happened in the trenches of World War I, so I find that interesting. It's an ode to soldiers, and has got great humor and heart. Chaplin is just cumulated by this point. He has perfected everything that makes his films great. A vibrant personality, hilarious mishaps, unrequited love, combining humor and sadness so well. There's a wondrous dream sequence too, which just makes this short all the more special to me. Chaplin has a family! One thing to note is a lot of the comedy in this one actually comes from some of the side characters, and I think that's neat to see. Chaplin once again takes on the dual role, and once again satirizes the drunk bourgeoisie. There's a mishap that happens, and that's really fun to see. A day in the life. Chaplin goes to work, goes out and drinks, comes home to his terrifying wife. Again, Chaplin was naturally at his A game. So many great gags with an elevator and a streetcar, still addressing the problems of everyday poor folk. The most memorable scene involves Chaplin catching bricks being thrown from behind him as he stacks them. The stunt was pulled off using reverse footage, and although I can tell, it's still very impressive, especially for the time. Chaplin never looks like he's moving backwards. He's very natural. And that's where Chaplin's charm comes from, the way he interacts with things. The final short Chaplin ever made, and maybe even the longest one. Chaplin is an ex-convict disguised as a parson. There's some pretty funny moments of Chaplin still not fitting in, and an awkward dinner scene. One of the highlights includes Chaplin's hilarious sermon, which is just expressionistically performed and very funny. Now that that's out of the way, let's move into bigger projects from the Little Tramp, with his first full-length feature, The Kid. Chaplin's first film to exceed an hour, and was his next step to artistic realization. The Kid co-starred Jackie Coogan as a boy orphaned as a baby, and raised by the Little Tramp himself. This film was cute, charming, hilarious of course, and packed full of emotion. The film was billed with the phrase, a smile, and perhaps a tear. The Kid is a comedy, but Chaplin wanted people to take his film seriously. The Kid might reflect Chaplin's own childhood, or it's speculated that it's a relationship he never had with his infant son, who died 10 days before shooting. Chaplin took a chance by blending comedy and drama in what was his first film at this length. Luckily, Chaplin's leap of faith didn't disappoint. The Kid was the second highest grossing film of the year. It was a smash hit. Audiences loved it. Critics loved it. Chaplin's gentle touch with his innocent humor is an ultimate feel-good trip. The characters and relationships are just so strong it makes you laugh harder and empathize more passionately. My favorite scene from the film is the chase scene, in which the tramp pursues his son after he is reclaimed by authorities. It's heart-pounding, but this scene wouldn't be half as effective if we didn't care about these two. Their relationship is so strong that we can't stand to see this father and son torn apart, and we're cheering out loud for the tramp to reunite with the boy. There's a magical dream sequence in the film involving angels and devils, reflecting how the tramp feels about evil and injustice in the world. A world in which a rich couple abandon their child, but a poor tramp will raise him. This scene might be a little too long and overstay its welcome with some viewers, especially because it comes at such a pivotal moment in the plot, but I find it beautiful. The ending will no doubt make you cry, with a smile beneath your brow. Hilarious and heartwarming, The Kid is a sure laugh and a guaranteed tear. Chaplin was riding high with success after success. With studios having unequivocal faith in him and his artistic prowess needing room to grow, Charlie finally felt that he could move on from comedy and broaden his filmmaking horizons. Chaplin took on the challenge with his sophomore feature, A Woman of Paris. A departure from comedy, A Woman of Paris is a romantic tragedy of sorts, with Chaplin behind the camera the entire time, all but a brief cameo. It stars Chaplin's favorite leading lady, Edna Purviance, in what was supposed to make her a star. She plays Marie, a poor woman turned socialite after courting a rich womanizer, when suddenly she runs into an old flame of hers. Marie contemplates her life, having to choose between luxury or love. The performances are great, bringing layers to the simplistic story, and show all the drama on their faces. Edna Purviance truly is fantastic here, torn between two worlds. Just when you think she's going one way, she digresses and sinks back to indecisiveness. I will mention that there are touches of humor throughout the film. No wild slapstick or anything that breaks the tone, but small moments of comedic relief. There's also some great use of visuals too, such as shadows and lighting, casting stark, presumptive shadows on their characters. There's a nice effect with train windows, and some clever motifs of a painting, and an ending that shows Chaplin knew how to use metaphorical images, despite not doing so. Often. And damn, that ending. If there's one thing Chaplin always delivered on, it was a great ending, and I think it's the part that really places the whole movie into perspective. It's a strongly mature and profound ending, illuminating the joys of simple life, and shows that women don't need to be married to be happy. In an industry that seemed to always end their movies with marriage, Chaplin's decision was a bold counteraction to the formula. Maybe we don't need to be married to be happy. Right, Charlie? Oh, Charlie. But there's a downside. A major downside. A Woman of Paris was a box office flop. Critics appreciated it, but nobody seemed to love it. Audiences weren't interested in seeing a Charlie Chaplin picture without Charlie Chaplin, which is sad even if the film isn't that great. Despite my positives for the film, A Woman of Paris is decent.
It sets up a very recognizable love triangle that can drag the film down at moments. With every good idea the film pulls off, a tired cliche wears it down. Chaplin was so depressed by the film's poor reception that he pulled it from theaters and wasn't seen by the public for 50 years. It is kind of sad, yet interesting to speculate what might have happened if the film was a hit. What if audiences didn't mind that Chaplin doesn't appear on screen and could accept his subtle dramatic technique without his inseparable persona? I recommend the film if you're curious. It won't blow you away and perhaps isn't a good entry point for Chaplin, but it's a well-executed exercise of a simple story. And execution is half the battle with cinema. Chaplin returned to his roots with an uproarious comedy, The Gold Rush. The film was much more successful and proved that audiences hadn't lost their full devotion to Chaplin. In this film, Chaplin uses the backdrop of the Alaskan Klondike for romance, humor, and examination of men's greed. The Gold Rush has not one, not two, but three memorable moments that have been synonymous with Chaplin's repertoire. The first being a scene where he eats a shoe. Another, a scene in which a house Chaplin is staying in teeters on the edge of a cliff, garnering both fear and laughter alike. Lastly is the bread roll dance. This scene is so simple, it's juvenile, but it works. I don't know what else to say to it. It's something a kid would do at a table, but it further proves theories that Chaplin can do the simplest of actions and be entertaining. That's why Chaplin stuck to simplicity so often, because he's good at it, and it's more intimate with audiences. Chaplin is somehow able to find comedy amongst this cold, dreary, isolated, grave setting. Chaplin himself didn't see much of a difference between comedy and tragedy, stating, "Life is a tragedy when seen in close-up, but a comedy in long shot." People wondered how we could make comedies about poverty, heartbreak, and devastation, but that's what comedy is. We can laugh at ourselves and make the cruel world around us less threatening. Yes, the Gold Rush was a terrible time for many who had to deal with the conditions, but at the center is a lone prospector, a hopeful, cheerful little man who can make us laugh. Not merely as a distraction, but a light illuminating flaws in our own ways of living. The Gold Rush shows how greed and wealth don't bring true happiness, but only snobbishness, if it doesn't lead to your downfall first. The Gold Rush is nothing short of a well-rounded comedy classic, full of everything you could want from Chaplin. Laughs, tricks, sets, heartache, and a unique worldview. Chaplin tells a story, through his natural performance and pantomime abilities, to create an effortless adventure of heartful wisdom. I strongly recommend it, so check out The Gold Rush. Chaplin's next film returned to a lighter tone for the most part. The Circus is kind of seen as the middle child in between The Gold Rush and City Lights. The film was still a success, but it wasn't as successful as Chaplin's previous motion picture. However, I still enjoy The Circus tremendously and gives more insight into the tramp character. The film opens with one of Chaplin's best chase scenes in my opinion, before the troubled tramp escapes to become a clown in the circus. One of my favorite moments is when the tramp is laughing at the clown's rehearsal, while next to him the ringmaster glares, wondering why this little weirdo is laughing like a child. It's Chaplin's brilliantly minute way of showing how sour the world is, and how out of place he feels. But he finds it funny, so don't let anyone stomp out your joy. In addition to that, The Circus contains one of Chaplin's most mature endings. A bittersweet conclusion where the tramp grows and does the right thing. Funny and endearing, The Circus may sometimes feel like one of his shorts gone on for too long, but the overall runtime is worth the satisfaction. City Lights is peak Charlie Chaplin, and is more often than not considered his masterpiece. Sometimes billed as a romantic comedy, City Lights depicts the tramp as he falls in love with a blind woman, who mistakes him for a wealthy man. Chaplin tries to raise money for her so she can pay her rent, set up a flower shop, and pay for her eye surgery. This is seen as Chaplin's sweetest film. It also contains stark criticism of society as well. The opening scene unveils a statue, revealing the tramp sleeping on it. A funny scene, but a foreshadow that the hero of the city is an unlikely one. In addition to the blind woman, the subplot involves the tramp's friendship with a drunk millionaire, harkening back to Chaplin's previous rich personas. The upper class waste their lives away in parties and debauchery, while the homeless tramp is the one to help others. The rich won't help the poor, so it's up to the poor to help each other. One of the highlights of the film is a gut-busting boxing match, not literally. Chaplin's physical comedy skills make it impossible to keep a straight face. In the heat of the fight, a vision of the blind woman comes to him, urging the poor tramp to carry on. City Lights is a story of hope. just how flimsy it can be, that like love, hope is blind. Some have said that Chaplin is a little unlikable the way he deceives the blind woman into believing he is rich, but I don't think that's the case. Chaplin sees a sad, desperate life in the blind woman, much like his own. He doesn't dare tell her because he knows it will crush her inside. Yet he is determined to get that money for her, and to Chaplin, that's all that matters. Maybe hope doesn't come in a fancy car with a slick and dazzling demeanor. Maybe hope is but a small ounce of faith resting in the hands of an unlikely man. A poor creature who can't accomplish much of anything except the will to love. City Lights then concludes with what is often cited as one of the greatest endings of all time. Just in case you don't know it, I won't say much about it. I already mentioned how skillful Chaplin was with endings, but this is his most beautiful, guaranteed to cry endings out of his whole filmography. To end this comedy on such a sweet note was a mature and clever move, and left the audience in a daze, as if experiencing their first kiss. They had laughed at side-splitting comedy, but were then treated like adults to a piece of art. And this decision paid off. No other film like City Lights exists. There's not a single piece of work that explores hope and kindness in such tender ways. It's a feel-good movie, an intelligent and entertaining feel-good movie. And if you need some cheering up, City Lights is the ultimate cure. Don't miss City Lights. You depend on it. We now arrive at my favorite Charlie Chaplin film. Given how much I love Chaplin, that's saying quite a lot. Modern Times is in my top 3 of all time, as I think it captures every one of Chaplin's trademarks best out of all his artwork. The comedy, the drama, the social satire, the romance, the relationship, the pathos, the performance, the visuals. Not only is it all here, but it's all animated to the finest extent it possibly could be. Modern Times takes place during the Great Depression and is Chaplin's last silent feature ever made. He wrestled with this conflict while making City Lights, fearing that people had lost interest in silent movies, as Hollywood had completely transitioned to sound by now. He actually made the film partially in sound, including a couple voices, sound effects, and a song, which I'll get to later. The film opens with a grand set inside a factory, a set piece that you wished you could play on. Neat-looking decor and intricate set pieces make this practically a playground for the tramp. Despite the fun, the place is a brainwashing industry that makes robots rather than products. Chaplin takes this opportunity to criticize how Americans value work over other human needs. The tramp soon meets an orphan girl, and the two decide to make a life together and dream of a nice home. Comfortable life, plenty of food, milk straight from the cow, you know, the 50s works. The tramp struggles to find a job, but due to his clumsiness, keeps getting in trouble. There's a scene in the beginning which depicts the tramp in jail. It perfectly encapsulates just how out of place he feels in this threatening world. Some memorable gags include the uproarious eating machine sequence, a daring stunt on roller skates, and most of all, Chaplin's gibberish dance. The tramp, having forgotten the lyrics to his song, sings nonsensical words in a French accent and still garners applause from the crowd. He does this all while pantomiming, and this scene is so delightful to watch. The actions are so well defined, and you can gather somewhat of a narrative from this performance. Chaplin takes a ridiculous idea and captures your eyes in an act that's unwittingly funny. The ending is just pure perfection and is on par with City Lights in my eyes. The final shot is reminiscent of his short, The Tramp, which famously depicted Chaplin walking down the road, alone and heartbroken, a motif that Chaplin has replicated a couple times. This time, however, he walks down the road, but he's not heartbroken. He has a companion. The Tramp and the Gamin didn't get their fairy tale ending, but that's okay. They dreamed of having it all, but that would make them no better than the other socialites. To a song composed by Chaplin himself, they remember to smile and soldier on, hopeful. In a world so concerned with money, status, and rat races, Chaplin shows us that all we really need in this world is each other. The ending may seem abrupt, but it puts the message of the film in perspective when you think. Due to his criticisms of capitalism, Chaplin garnered a great amount of his first controversy. Many critics were dissatisfied with the satire on industrialization, and led to accusations of Chaplin being a communist. Wow, loving others more than your soul-sucking corporate business? That's clearly propaganda and not just basic human kindness. A federal investigation on him was opened, conducted by J. Edgar Hoover, America's biggest C-word! Here's only the beginning of this story. More later. Anyway, I love Modern Times. Everything about it is joyful, brilliant, and expertly performed. There are few films that I think are funnier, sweeter, and potent, while also being profound and satirical. Blending all these themes in a seamless balance, no component squandering the other. I've seen it many times already, and will be watching it many times in the future. I hope you love it just as much as I do. Not only Chaplin's first fully sound feature, but in my opinion, the riskiest comedy ever made. The Great Dictator serves as a satire on the German Führer himself, Adolf Hitler. Chaplin, already being noted for his resemblance to Hitler, played his parody, Adenoid Hinkle, and a Jewish barber that may or may not be the tramp. Chaplin uses this film to mock Hitler and criticize fascism, war, and anti-Semitism, and what might be the first daring comedy ever made. But Seth Rogen made a movie about assassinating the leader man of North Korea. Yeah, for a country that already hates North Korea. Satirizing Hitler may seem trite for comedy nowadays, but here's some background. When I say this is a risky film, it's important to take in mind the historical context. This film was made before America was even involved in World War II, at a time when not only were we neutral with Germany, but some even had respect. From their eyes, it seemed as if Hitler was rebuilding his country. Herbert Hoover even said, "In America, one must have such regard for spiritual and intellectual freedom that any restrictive measures such as had been adopted in Germany would not be possible there." Chaplin wasn't banking off controversy, he was starting his own. Hitler being caricatured in cartoons wasn't the norm yet. This was the first lampooning of the thin-mustached man, and the public was divided on it. But the public is stupid because this is one of the funniest and insightful movies of all time. Hinkle has gone down as one of the funniest movie villains in all of cinema. His stupidity, his ego, his temper highlight just how much of a buffoon he is. It's basically Chaplin telling the audience, let's not be afraid of this guy. Chaplin loves to take juvenile, silly ideas and make them amazing. Here, we get a scene where Hinkle dances with an inflatable globe, a scene that influenced other narcissists. It's fun to watch, but also represents Hitler's fetish for world domination. Chaplin's sense of humor echoes throughout the palace halls, my favorite being a scene where Hinkle gets in a food fight with Mussolini. The other side of the film takes place in a Jewish ghetto, where the film's charm and persecution alike reside. Chaplin portrays the cruel mistreatment of the Jewish people, notwithstanding his antics as the lovable tramp. I mean, Jewish barber brings to the film. Yeah, you know, your favorite character. Jewish barber. It may seem a bit insulting to try and make a comedy of such atrocities, but The Great Dictator doesn't make light of the situations. It makes light of the evil men that do it, and is at the expense of their reputations. I mentioned earlier how Chaplin felt about comedy and tragedy, but it should come as no surprise to people in the 2020s that this is how comedy works. There's always something or someone we're laughing at, and in this case, it's the most evil man in history. Mockery is the ultimate form of criticism. It belittles them, and you're not afraid anymore. As Mel Brooks said, if you ridicule them, bring them down with laughter, they can't win. You show how crazy they are. In addition, The Great Dictator is more than just a movie where we laugh at Hitler, but illuminates the Nazis' transgressions and offers encouraging words of hope. Chaplin, on a roll with endings, concludes with the greatest speech of all time. Chaplin gives a chance for the little man to speak, the average citizen, on how they feel about war and dictatorship. I can hardly express my admiration for this speech. I tear up just thinking about it. It's been shared across numerous social media outlets, universally agreeing on its powerful statements. And Chaplin shows just what a terrific actor he is by speaking with passion and putting soul into every word he utters. The first time Chaplin ever spoke, and he gave the greatest fury of words ever mentioned on screen. However, as I stated before, the public was a little uneasy about this, with some people calling him a communist. That was the toxic political climate of the time. Disagreeing with Hitler makes you a communist. While the film did generate outrage from closeted fascists, it was still quite a big hit and is remembered as one of Chaplin's finest films. The Great Dictator is not just a great comedy, but a great movie. A stark satire that never feels pessimistic, yet never lets go. Hilarious and hopeful. See one of the greatest movies of all time for yourself. I remember when I was younger, I actually avoided this film. I was told that it was the weakest of Chaplin's features, and the slight change in character and tone put me off as well. However, a few years later, I finally watched it, and regret avoiding it all this time. Monsieur Verdoux is hilarious, clever, and intelligent. Monsieur Verdoux is a notorious Bluebeard who will marry rich women, kill them, and then take off with their money, in order to provide for his real family. This film is obviously a black comedy, and Chaplin's screen persona is drastically changed. Many weren't sure what to think of Chaplin's change of pace, and stirred a great amount of controversy at the time of its release. However, I implore you to put your worry aside, because Monsieur Verdoux is a bold and special contribution of Chaplin's work. The comedy, while slightly darker in tone, still contains Chaplin's physical humor, and has a couple funny lines here and there too. Yet amongst this sickly scenario, Chaplin manages to work in some tender moments. He strikes up a friendship with a poor girl, and uncovers true compassion in Verdoux. Chaplin also gets philosophical with this film, as the character explores existence and morality. I love the final scene which he talks about the great murderers of the world, using mass destruction and genocide, and that he is only an amateur in comparison. The film perhaps falters when it tries to sympathize too much with Verdoux. Sometimes this works well, other times not so much. For instance, the inclusion of his original family, such as a wife in a wheelchair, feels like he's stretching to justify his actions a bit. We don't need him to be good. I'm perfectly fine with laughing at a terrible man, but when you give Verdoux sympathy, that causes confusion, and you're not sure whether to laugh or cry for this madman. On the other hand, the plot never gets bogged down, and I enjoy seeing his different aliases, along with his multiple wives. My favorite of the wives being Annabella Bonheur, played by Martha Ray, a loudmouth woman who proves to be a foil to the devious Monsieur Verdoux in more ways than one. The film wasn't successful upon its initial release, but has gained a new appreciation over the years. It's been called one of Chaplin's most slyly and profound pictures. Hilarious and even thought-provoking, don't skip Monsieur Verdoux like I did. He's done it again. Chaplin made another personal, poignant, and uplifting film with Limelight. I know I'm sounding like a broken record when talking about Chaplin, but I love this movie. A semi-autobiographical film, Limelight centers on an aged, wash-up vaudeville comedian, Calvero, struggling to retake his career. The initial thing audiences will note, even before watching, is that Limelight reflects Chaplin himself as a silent film star, now left behind in a world of sound. A man with decreasing popularity and increasing troubles. This film is also famous for containing a scene with fellow silent film actor, Buster Keaton, another comedian I greatly admire. Limelight marks the first and only appearance Chaplin and Keaton made together. This was a dream come true for so many fans of classic comedy, and the excitement paid off. This scene is just what I would want from a Charlie and Buster team-up. Their articulate mannerisms, surreal gags, they interact with the scenery like professional comedians should. Their well-defined personalities work off each other so compatibly, and it's the perfect climax. The structure of the film is interesting, as Calvero comes off as a very cheerful and good-humored man who rehabilitates our leading lady at the start, a suicidal ballerina dancer played by Claire Bloom. She's given up on dancing and life, and refuses to even stand up. Calvero, however, raises her spirits and body, and instills a newfound love for performing, life, and Calvero himself. Soon as the wave of permanence washes over him, Calvero becomes depressed as well, and wants to give up too, only for the ballerina, Teresa, to return the favor. I love their relationship for each other, the way Calvero and Teresa inspire each other and share a passion for the arts. Chaplin's jester-like quips are so clever and delightful, not just making you smile, but reminding you why life is worth it, with each joke and each word. I love this kind of traditional humor, and relished in the vaudeville scenes. These flashbacks aren't just feeding us context. Chaplin made these scenes legitimately enjoyable. These funny songs and clever lines make me wish I lived at this time, just so I could see more stage shows like it. Additionally, I think the visuals are vastly improved here from other Chaplin films, containing expressive lighting and interpretive shots and blocking. The film is a celebration of art and captures the struggle of all artists. For their passion to be strong, that is all they want to do in life, to bring joy and imagination to others and to themselves. Limelight isn't necessarily a comedy, but Calvero's delightful demeanor and stage shows help to balance out the tones of the film. It never goes too pitiful or too depressing, too deprecating or too self-destructive, and reminds us that the clown and the ballerina are there to reflect life, the joys and sorrows of it. Limelight is a melancholic and humorous tragic comedy for the performers, the poets, the dancers, the clowns, and the creators. It's yet again a sincere and touching film about the tides of the human soul. Limelight seemed to prophesize an even greater decline in popularity and respect. Chaplin's career was spiraling downward more and more over the years. Scandals of him were being published left and right, based on his personal affairs and political beliefs. The FBI had demonized him to the public, using his court trials to smear his image. At this point, Chaplin's films were wrought with negative reception, rooted in their hatred for him. Chaplin was booed, and members of the HUAC boycotted his films. These were all reactions to Limelight, and that wasn't even a political movie. It was absolute insanity that people actually feared some ragged clown who falls down for a living as a threat to national security. In 1952, after the completion of Limelight, he set sail to London for the premiere of the film. That morning, Chaplin recounted how he had a strange premonition that he would not be returning. On the boat, a telegram was brought to him, and Chaplin was informed that a re-entry into the United States for him was refused. He was heartbroken. After leaving England, America had become his home. All his friends, his achievements, his greatest work all took place on Californian soil. Chaplin decided that he wouldn't try to readmit, and swore to never return to the United States ever again. Chaplin's next effort was another autobiographical film, which had light humor, but also political criticism. In the midst of being outcast from the place he called home, A King in New York is a satire on all points of American culture, including commercialism, plastic surgery, celebrity culture, and McCarthyism. Charlie Chaplin plays King Igor Shadov, fleeing his country caught in revolution, and resides in New York. Chaplin keeps his usual physical comedy and wit through charm and observation. He is once again a fish out of water, exploring the surreal nation through fresh eyes. There's a scene with movie trailers that is just hilarious to me, as Chaplin pokes fun at American pop culture. It could have been so easy for Chaplin to come off as spiteful toward the US, but he always manages to keep his head up and give the audiences what they love about him: humor and heart. One of the subplots involves a boy, played by Chaplin's own son, Michael, as his parents are arrested under suspicion of communism. He's on the run and hides in King Shadow's hotel suite. This represents the sheer lunacy of McCarthy witch hunts through a boy caught in the crosshairs of just being different. Chaplin says nothing about communism, he only attacks the American officials for their fear-mongering obsession. Putting a boy at the center of this conflict might be a ploy to get sympathy more easily, which is an understandable criticism. But remember, the boy is Chaplin. An innocent and intelligent man, one who learned about freedom from the very country who was trying to take it away. I'd say there are some inconsistencies in the character of King Shadov. He's a kind, but also very astute character, so it comes off as jarring when you see him dump a plate of beans on the child, or get his fingers stuck in a hose. King Shadov could have been portrayed a little more gaily and free-spirited, which might have made his misplacement more clear and admirable, while also excusing some of his antics. Nonetheless, Chaplin's performance still shines through, and A King in New York is a funny satire that firmly yet optimistically tells America that if they want to be a respected nation of liberty and democracy, they need to start acting like it. The final film in Chaplin's Person from a Place trilogy that hardly anybody's seen is also his final picture he ever made. It premiered 10 years after A King in New York, and I'm sorry to say that this is one of Chaplin's weakest films. It's one of the few films I dislike from Chaplin, and is without a doubt the worst of his feature-length movies. A Countess from Hong Kong pairs up Marlon Brando and Sophia Loren, two legendary actors, with Chaplin giving himself a cameo. Brando plays a rich man on a cruise, and Loren a former Russian countess who is now a prostitute. She stows away in Brando's room, and the two form a relationship. At least, they're supposed to. I just don't find this script funny. It lacks any jokes or humorous point of views. There's a couple awkward scenes as well, which I just didn't know what to make of it. I felt very uncomfortable, was asking myself, what the hell is going on? For instance, the scene after Loren marries Brando's valet, they go into the next room, and I won't get into that. It's just weird. I really don't like Marlon Brando in this film. He's always shouting at Loren, which makes him unlikable. If he toned down his explosions and expressed himself more at mid-range, like his co-stars or Chaplin, then perhaps he wouldn't have bothered me so much. But no, he's Marlon Brando. He can be late to set every day and halt production, and then call Chaplin a terrible man. I'll save the Brando tangent for another day. I'm ripping on this movie now. There is a dash of global commentary in Loren's character, and she was actually based on someone Chaplin met. It's a film for displaced females and the circumstances they must live in sometimes. Loren's character can even be seen as a stand-in for the tramp, given her statement on happiness and positivity.
I'll also add that I do like the music, as Charlie Chaplin's composing is always great. Natasha's theme song eventually became a pop song by Petula Clark, called This Is My Song.
However, besides this undercurrent, there's scarcely signs of any drama, poignancy, or comedy. Loren and Brando have very little chemistry together, and that's a shame for two performers who are usually great. The film was trashed in its premiere as well, but it's been finding some newfound respect, much like some of Chaplin's previous works. Many find other things to appreciate about the movie, although the only thing I admire is the background of Lauren's character. Anyhow, there is a chance you might like this film, but I don't recommend it. If you like Chaplin as much as I do, then you might want to check it out anyway, but don't get upset when it's duller than a doorknob. It is rather sad how Chaplin's career just kind of fizzled out. The tramp never said goodbye, he just sort of vanished. I desperately wish Chaplin had returned with a glorious finale and went out with a bang. He was working on a script titled The Freak, about a girl with wings, and I wallow more and more in the fact that it was never made. However, Chaplin's story turns to a bittersweet ending. He spent his remaining years composing scores or making readjustments to his earlier films. He lived a humble life with his wife and children in Switzerland, residing in a peaceful manner. McCarthyism had long died out, and soon Chaplin was remembered for his contributions he made to cinema. In 1972, the Academy Awards invited Charlie back to the States to receive an honorary Oscar. It was the first time he had been to the United States in 20 years. After a heartfelt appraisal to Charlie Chaplin, he came on stage to accept his award for a lifetime in arts. He was greeted with a 12-minute standing ovation, the longest in Academy history. Chaplin was emotionally stunned at seeing his hard work and passion in his films paying off. After a tumultuous life of poverty, divorce, and betrayal, here he was, surrounded by those whose lives were transformed by him, by those who loved him. In his final years, Chaplin wrote an autobiography and re-released A Woman of Paris. He was finally knighted by the Queen in 1975. His health was declining, and he had to take the honor in a wheelchair. On December 25th, 1977, Christmas morning, Charlie Chaplin died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 88 years old. Chaplin did it all. He wrote, directed, performed, edited, scored. Charlie Chaplin's films had comedy, poignancy, wit, charm, playfulness, imagination, intelligence, aesthetic worldviews, and simple wisdom. They were comedies taken seriously by the man himself. Chaplin often expressed his own personal beliefs and wanted to share with the world what he thought, even if that made him unpopular with the majority of groups. Chaplin was not just some industry puppet, he was an artist. He had the guts to say what he wanted and express it his own way. Even when the country that he had called home turned its back on him, he didn't slip. He was upset, but he didn't change for anyone. He kept to his beliefs, and he kept making art. He continued to spread joy and truth throughout the rapturous political climate of the time. He worked hard, he pressed, he proved that he had talent, and he got started. He kept growing dissatisfied with all his ventures, until he started making pictures. Stage, acting, comedy, traveling. He was in a rut until he touched the camera for the first time, and found it the best way to express himself. Making movies was his calling. If you come to love Chaplin as much as I do, I'll also recommend Richard Attenborough's Chaplin. It can be a bit rushed at times, but it's a tender celebration of Charlie and his life. The film has a stacked cast, featuring Robert Downey Jr. as Chaplin. The film even has Ingmar Bergman's cinematographer, Sven Nykvist, handling the photography. It's so satisfying to see all these different talents come together to pay tribute to their hero of cinema.
Tons of comedians have been influenced by him, the likes of Woody Allen and Rowan Atkinson. All over the world, people have tried to imitate Chaplin. Mario Marino, Jacques Tati, Raj Kapoor, Giulietta Massina are all called the Charlie Chaplin of their respective countries. French filmmaker Jean Renoir cited Chaplin as his favorite filmmaker. Russian art house filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky even praised Chaplin for his unique ability and unmatched impact on the world. And most of all, Federico Fellini, who called Chaplin a sort of atom from which we are all descended from, confirming that Chaplin is a cornerstone in the future of cinema. Charlie Chaplin said, "Nothing lasts forever in this wicked world, not even our troubles." And that's why he tried to have such a positive outlook on life, why he tried to bring joy to people. He tried to kill the troubles, and eventually his own troubles left him in peace, just like he had done for us.
Thank you, Charlie Chaplin. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more content. Be sure to follow me on Letterboxd for individual reviews. I review other movies, I give more detailed reviews of the films I discussed in this video. Like, share, thumb the bell.
Leave a comment, let me know what you think of Charlie Chaplin, what your favorite film is. Is it a short film? Is it a feature-length film? Is it a Countess from Hong Kong? Sorry. If you like that. Not sorry that if I offended you. Sorry that you like that movie. And I'll see you guys in the next Kinotherapy. Take care.